agradeceros que vuestra presencia aquí en este workshop que organiza el Instituto de Biología Molecular y Celular con el objetivo fundamental de poder transmitir en una jornada divulgativa y no muy formal, sino más bien informal y didáctica, el cómo escribir artículos científicos y que fundamentalmente sean publicados por las revistas del mayor impacto. Y para ello, el Instituto de Biología Molecular y Celular ha considerado una propuesta que hizo uno de sus investigadores, el profesor José Luis Neira, para invitar al editor de Elsevier, Anthony Newman, que tenemos aquí también que agradecer su presencia, para que nos va a contar realmente, después de su dilatada experiencia como editor de una de las editoriales científicas más prestigiosas, cuáles son esos trucos para que se puedan realizar los artículos, se puedan escribir los artículos de la forma más precisa, más atractiva y más convincente para que sean aceptadas en revistas que van desde el nivel de Nature hasta el nivel de Cell, por poneros un nivel extremadamente estrecho en índice de impacto. Yo creo que esta es una tremenda oportunidad para todos, especialmente para los jóvenes, que van a poder tener de primera mano y de un editor que probablemente ha visto más de 10.000 trabajos y ha podido tener estadísticas de cuáles son los que tienen las mejores probabilidades de ser aceptados y cuáles las menos, y aprender qué hace que un trabajo sea meritorio de ser aceptado o de ser realmente atractivo para una editorial, para un editor que quiera publicarlo. Yo creo que realmente es una oportunidad única y os invito a todos, fundamentalmente a los jóvenes, a que exprimáis todos aquellos trucos de Anthony, que preguntéis, que preguntéis y que preguntéis, la regla de las 3 P's, para conocer todos y cada uno de los secretos que hay detrás de una editorial, para poder enfocar los artículos que emanan de vuestras tesis doctorales, los artículos que emanan de vuestros proyectos de investigación y que puedan ser publicados en las mejores revistas utilizando estos trucos que Anthony hoy nos va a comentar. Y ahora, si me permitís, voy a cambiar al inglés. Ya le había anunciado a Anthony que primero iba a hacer una pequeñísima introducción en castellano para todos vosotros y que ahora voy a hacer la introducción en inglés. I just told them the great opportunity that we have of having you here, just teaching us how to write a paper in terms of how to identify those tips that make that the paper is different, that is high quality, and that when submitted to a journal, the editor will say, wow, I want to publish this. Okay. This is, I think, fundamental, and I have invited the young students just to squeeze your knowledge about this as much as they can, to ask a lot of questions, and to try to learn as much, because this will be one strategy, one way of getting the results from their thesis and from their projects to publish in the best journals, the high-impact journals that I think that all of us are always wishing. So I want to thank Elsevier for sponsoring also this workshop, and Anthony for coming here and give us these tips of this talk. And without further delay, I will just give the word to Anthony, thanking him again for being in Alicante and for accepting the invitation of the Institute of Molecular and Cellular Biology to participate in this very interesting workshop. Thank you very much, Anthony. All yours. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. And it's also thank you for the invitation from the university to be here, because I like doing these workshops. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoy it. We obviously have to do this workshop in English for two reasons. Firstly, you do not want to hear my Spanish. And secondly, English is the language of publishing currently. 100 years ago, you could publish in English or German or French or Russian. And in 100 years' time, perhaps, it's going to be English or Chinese, or just Chinese, I don't know. But now it's English. English is the language of science. In some fields, obviously you publish in your native language, say Spanish. So you say law or literature or perhaps even some sorts of local medicine. But in general, the publications are in English. So my job in this couple of hours is to share a whole bunch of information with you. As you have gathered, the fact I'm tethered to this place because of the cameras and everything, it's being filmed for some long video. But also afterwards, the slide set of these PowerPoint is available as a PDF for you to have, and the Institute will make that available to you. So you don't need to make lots and lots of notes unless you want to. If I say something that is not understandable, please raise your hand and say, excuse me, explain it differently. Because that's the advantage that a speaker has with an audience. That if the listener doesn't understand, they can say, and the speaker then phrases it differently. As an author, you can't do that. You've got to decide ahead of time, is this clear enough for every reader in the world? And that's a challenge that you have as an author. And particularly if you're a new author, a young researcher, this is a skill you haven't developed enough yet. It gets better. After about 20 years, you're great. But it's a long 20 years. So what you've got to think about always is from the viewpoint, not of you as the author, but as a reader. The reader's focus, the reader's benefit, the reader's advantage. And by doing that, what happens is the reader appreciates this and appreciates your science, hopefully uses your work, even more hopefully cites you, so you have some citations. Because at the end of the day, citations are the value internationally of your work. So now I'm going to try some interesting combinations of things, because normally I use all sorts of things with laser pointers, and I've been told, no, today it's being filmed. It has to be doing this, that, and the other, and it's all screens. So I'm now going to try and do a combination of things. So if I get frustrated and I go wrong, bear with me. Bear with me. So now let's see how we can do this, because you've got the camera somewhere looking at my hand. And there's so here, what we're going to have here is how you get published. And then, of course, you've got, before you begin, is the general area of realizing what you've got to be aware of in terms of what's out there. Then you've got the selecting the audience. That is where you want to publish to get most people to read your work who will appreciate it and cite you. Then you have the article structure, how you write it, the structure of the thing. Then, of course, they have the review process and what's going to happen there. And with this review process, you've got that. Oops, that's going to work. Fun here. Okay. So the review process is just what happens when you send it in, how you cope with reviewers, if you are going to be a reviewer, how you should review papers. And finally, something on the author ethics. It's a long workshop. Far longer than you're used to. Normally, lectures are half an hour, 40 minutes. This is 2 hours. So mindful of the fact that you might need a break partway through. After we've talked about selecting the journal and so on, before we start talking about the article structure, then we'll have a short break, a bathroom break, 10 minutes or so. Not just for you, for me. And also, I must admit, I do have some water down here, because talking continuously for 2 hours doesn't always work. So what we have in science is a peer-reviewed journal. The peer-reviewed journal is the best process we have, or peer-reviewed system. There are books, but more importantly, the peer-reviewed journal is what's out there. The first peer-reviewed journal you can see on the screen is this journal here. This is the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, 1665, the first peer-reviewed journal. Unusual. Before that, they didn't exist. The idea of sending comments on someone else's work and then somehow that person had to adapt it was not in existence until 1665. So, and then that journal went along quite happily, and then over time more journals joined, and more and more and more. And so typically now you have something like 25,000 journals, 2,300 publishers, and growing and growing and growing. Now, everyone says, oh, there's far too many journals. There's too many journals. They're growing like mushrooms. But the reality is there are more scientists. There are 3% more scientists per year, year in, year out, and have been for the last few hundred years. And those scientists are writing more, particularly in life sciences. And so the output growth is about 4.5% papers per year. They've got to go somewhere, and they go in appropriate journals. And so all publishers do is they create journals that are appropriate for all you scientists who are writing. And so if you ever think, why are there more journals? Because there's more scientists. That's how it works. We wouldn't launch journals unless there was a need for them. Elsevier is a reasonably large publishing house. Some people have heard of us, some people haven't. We publish about 25% of all science, technical, medical material. So it's a pretty large area. Well, that's fine, but the important thing to me is it gives us an awful lot of value. We see all the various interesting articles coming in. As you can see at the top of the screen, 600,000 articles on average a year come in. That's a lot. And we don't see them all ourselves. Of course, all the editors see them. There's lots of editors. But if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, 40 to 90% of articles are rejected. That's sad. In life sciences, my field, 70% are rejected. And half of those are rejected for silly things. And so we decided about 4 years ago, Elsevier publishing colleagues, we would put together some sort of tips and tricks workshop to share with the world to help people know how not to do things, what to do well, what to not do well, because that gives us a way to help you guys. Now, why are we doing these free workshops all over the world? We benefit. If you write good papers, we get a quarter of those, year in, year out. That's our benefit. Our journals are better. So it's a win-win. You get more papers published, and we get a quarter of those papers because we publish a quarter of everything. Wonderful. So that's the background to what we're doing here. And because we've seen so many thousands and thousands of papers, because we talk with so many different editors, we have all the horror stories of what goes wrong. And by sharing those with you, we want you to avoid those traps, those errors. Because if you understand what happens in publishing, hopefully you will be able to publish easier, and that's the idea. So it's just as someone taught you once how to actually do pipetting in a laboratory, I'm going to teach you a bit about just what happens behind the scenes in publishing. And with that extra skill set, one of many you have already, just an extra one to your set of skills, it makes you better prepared to write better papers. That's the idea. And so, how do we do this? Well, we do this just by two things. Firstly, suggesting what you should do and suggesting what you shouldn't do. And then hopefully that whole little set of things, and there's so many things to remember, that's why we hand out the PDF. And hopefully with that combination, it works fine. This works for most scientific fields, not all, but most. But coming back to publishing in general, in 1997, we still had print-only journals. Now, it doesn't seem that long ago, or it seems a long time ago, it depends how you see it. But before then, it was only in print. You went to the library, you opened up the journal, you read it through, and you took photocopies. And then a year later, it went electronic. And then by 2009, 75% of the readership was online. And now, 2012, 2013, we're about 95, 98, 99%, depending on the field, online usage. So a journal which may have had an 800 print run, tiny amount, read by 800 libraries, now has perhaps a 50 print run and 8,000 institutes subscribing electronically. So far greater reach, far greater exposure, which means that your science is seen by more people, which is good. Now, you could say this is important only for librarians, and it is very important for librarians, because librarians do their planning of all the whole process. But it's also important for authors. You now have to recognize that every single person who reads your article will read it online. They won't go to the library, find the journal issue, open it up, read it, photocopy it. They will go online, they will read, hopefully, the HTML version, or if not, they will print out the PDF version. And because of that, you have the richness available to you of doing extra things. There's the automatic linking through of references, which we do for you, but also on the right-hand side of the article in HTML, you can have the interactive plots, graph, you can have links out to databases, you can have videos embedded up to 3 or 4 minutes describing the benefits of this particular article. All these extra things help the reader enjoyment or the reader benefits of your article. And so always remember, you are writing for an electronic readership. And so it is important for librarians, but also important for authors. And with this difference, you also got to recognize you've got much more exposure, so everyone sees your article, everyone sees everyone else's article too. So everyone gets more exposure. So it's not as if you are special, but everyone now gets more exposure. And of course, with that extra electronic aspects of all this, you also now have, of course, the simple electronic manuscript submission. You know, if you can click that, see what works. There you are. Wonderful. Now, electronic submission, again, hasn't been around too long. In the past, for some of the older faculty here, you'd actually have to do 3 sets of copies of your manuscript and 3 sets of figures, 3 sets of the tables, divide them up, put them in an envelope, send them by recorded delivery to the editor somewhere in the world, who will then split them up, send them out to 2 different sets of referees, hang on to 1 set in case they didn't do anything, and then perhaps send photocopies to the next people. And that was a very slow process, but because it was also expensive for you to send these 3 sets of copies, 3 sets of India ink figures, all of that meant that you took care that when you sent was actually complete. Now about 10% of people pushing submit have incomplete manuscripts. They say everything's there and it's not. They say there's 5 figures and there's 3. They say they've added the referee suggestions and they haven't. Because it's so quick and easy to submit, people are impatient. And so we see too many incomplete submissions coming to us. So please, before you push that submit button, make sure everything is there. Everything should be there, it's there. Because otherwise, it's just a waste of your time, because they're going to just send it back to you, which is not what you want. You want to be the one who actually, the editor says, okay, this is neat. Who are the best people in the world to evaluate this? We'll send it out to them. That's what you want. You want it to breeze through the review system and get accepted. You don't want it to be rejected straight away because you didn't think enough when you sent it in. And of course, you've also got, I say, the subscription journals have been around for a long, long time. But you also have some interesting experiments. They are experiments because open access is an interesting experiment, a successful experiment, but an interesting experiment, because it's only been going 10 years compared to the 250 years of the other model. And just as also open archiving is an interesting experiment, also a successful experiment. And I'm sure there's going to be other experiments coming in the coming years, even better, different. But at the same time, it's still just another way of accessing information. So most of you will be using the library's subscription process. they have subscribed to the full Wiley set, the Springer set, ACS, Elsevier, and so on. And because of that, anywhere in the IP address of the university, you can see all the various journals. It's fine. But also these open access journals are out there too. Now, it's a different sort of model, and you might not need to think you know about open access. Is open access important to you? Maybe yes, maybe no. The important thing to me is you need to know about it, to be briefed on it, just because things change. Governments change their policy, universities change their policy. You might change to a different university, which has a different policy in open access. So if you haven't had to think about open access and don't think you need to, fine. I'm just going to give you a few slides now talking about just some background to open access, just so you've got an idea what there is. Because the important thing is you mustn't be forced to publish open access unless you really have to for some various reasons. But in general, with open access, you've got gold open access. That's the real open access. Every single article in a journal is open access. And there are many open access journals like that. And the gold open access is, it has to go through peer review. It has to be good enough. If it's not good enough, it gets rejected. If it doesn't make it, that's just it. You've got to go somewhere else and make a better journal, better journal article. But if it is accepted, what happens is you've then got to pay to publish. And this paying to publish is the so-called author fee or the gold open access. That's fine. Someone's got to pay. Either the librarian pays or the author pays. So the author pays. And the gold open access journals are out there. And they're a bit different in that you have a different sort of copyright. The author keeps copyright. And the author then licenses the publisher to present it on their behalf online. And the author also retains a sort of a copyright license and a distribution license called the Creative Commons license, the CC. And so that's all the whole background to the mechanism of gold open access. You get more downloads, more exposure with open access. We know that already. But you get about the same level of citations. So it looks to me that scientists who want to read your work will have access to it anyway and will cite it. So the citation level is about the same, but the downloads are certainly higher with open access than with conventional journals. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I'm just sharing it with you. You also have the green open access. And the green open access is the so-called archival open access, or open archiving. So for example, with NIH, they give grants in the US saying after 12 months, material should be available in PubMed Central, and there it is. So therefore, you publish normally in a journal, and then everyone with a subscription can see that information. After 12 months, it becomes open. Everyone in the world can see it through PubMed Central. So that's a mechanism. And that's, some journals have 6 months gap, some 12, some 18 months. But in general, this idea of after a certain period, then the rest of the world can see them. And there are many journals which actually have this so-called green open access. Some journals like Feb's Letters have everything open access after 12 months. Others have just certain ones where the authors have requested it because of their funding rights, or funding needs. Because remember, the people who give you money to research have certain rules, and you've got to abide by those rules, because if you don't, they won't give you any more money. And so you really have to be just aware. You might not like it, but that's the way it goes. So if you are going to publish gold open access, and there's lots of good journals out there, for many years people said, Elsevier, you're not open access publishers, you don't like open access, so you're the other group. No, we're not, of course we're not. We publish most of our journals, most of our 2,000 journals are regular conventional journals, and about 30 or 50 are open access so far. But we have both. So when you as an author are choosing to, you've got to find the right journal. No, let's go back one. You find the right journal, then that is, you've got to find reputable journals. There are some journals which don't exist. They're fake journals. And it's a scam from India or somewhere just to get your money. Other journals which do exist, but in fact the quality is very, very poor, and they are just there to get your money, but they do exist. And there's actually a list of those, and I'll give you the link a bit later. It's called the Jeffrey Beal list of predatory open access journals. In other words, journals that are just out to get your money. And the review period is about 10 minutes, long enough to type the invoice and send it to you. So basically, not good journals. Very similar to real journals. So if you are looking for a journal, make sure it's real, make sure it exists, make sure the archiving policy is sound. Let's face it, you don't want a fake journal to pull the plug in 10 minutes, well, no, not 10 minutes, in a year, and all of your research is gone. You actually want to be up there forever. Publishers' job is to archive everything forever. So everything you publish is there longer than you live. That's the idea. So anyone in the future can see what you've published, can benefit by it, learn from it, and improve on it as science improves. And that's what we do. We look at previous people's work, and so this archiving is very important, and some of these dubious journals don't do it. So make sure it's a reputable journal. See what the people who give you the money, the funding body or university say. Some funding bodies have no policy yet. Some universities have no open access policy yet. Some say you can publish where you want, but you must also put it in the university repository. Again, every university is a bit different. And these things are changing. And they're changing because everything is changing all around us now at open access. See what the journal lets you do, the posting policy. Many journals, even conventional journals, not even open access journals, say you can post your existing submitted Word file on your homepage. You just check these things out. It's called the author's rights. And it's nice to know what rights you have. And of course, when you do have your open access article accepted, choose either the CC BY, the standard, very, very broad license, or you choose a more restrictive license, CC BY, NCSA or something. And again, there's information on websites that tells you the different sorts of licenses. So it's the sort of thing you need to think about, maybe, maybe not. Once you have published, you share that link or that PDF with the world, because of course that's what it's all about. At the moment, the UK is leading the field in Europe. They have the RC UK, the Research Council's UK policy, already in place, already pushing to have most publicly funded articles published open access. Now, in Europe, you have the European Commission have what's called the Horizon 2020 project. And that is that by the end of 2014, which is not long, every member state of the European Union must have a policy on open access publishing, and they have until 2020 to put it into place. So your government will be making a policy during next year on open access. I'm not sure how it's going to affect you. You just need to be aware of it, and it might be years before it starts to be a burden or not, but it's still, you need to know about it, because if they say you must do this, here's the money, and then you take the money, do the research and publish another way, when you go back with your hand out for the next money and say, here's my grant proposal, it's a wonderful grant proposal, just this much money, and here's the wonderful research you'll get, one little group will look at what did you do with the last money? We wanted you to publish this way, you didn't. So the chance of that grant going through is very diminished because you didn't go by their rules last time. So please be aware what the rules are, because it might affect your funding in the future. And in the US, you have the Office of Science and Technology Policy, who are doing the same sort of thing for the US. So it's very interesting. So all these various groups and parties and governments and universities are all thinking about what's important for archiving, what's important for access, what's important for repository, should it be central, how should it be data mined, and all these things are going on around you now. So you as a researcher, your head down, looking at this, fine, but in fact, all these things are part of your surroundings. So just be aware of them, and it might be they don't affect you much, but you still need to be aware of them a bit. So that's a little bit of background on open access, in case you thought open access isn't for me. It might be in the future because you have to. So just be aware of that, all right? So that's an aside. I'll now turn away from open access, but it's important to spend 5 minutes or so talking about open access, just so you've got an idea what's going on. Now, coming back to publishing. That's what we're here for. Why do you publish? What's your personal reason? It could be to get a degree. It could be to get funding. It could be to get promotion or something else. Now, in Scandinavia, very simple model. They publish 3 papers around what their research. They link it with introduction and linking text. It's called a thesis. Works very well. And that's the Scandinavian model. Other ways, people have their thesis and then afterwards they publish work. But every country is a bit different. In funding, of course, you have the more you publish, the higher citations you have, higher your H-index. That helps you with your funding, it helps you with your promotion. It could be you've got a personal reason. It could be that your mother was a famous scientist and she published lots of papers, and you want to follow the family tradition and publish lots of papers too. Good for you. Does it matter? Does it matter why you're publishing? To you, yes. To your reader, no. When you pick up a scientific article, if you read an article online, do you think about why that person has actually written the article? Of course not. Do you think, oh, that surname, is that the famous mother? No, you don't think that. You don't at all. You just think, okay, what is in it for me? You're actually quite selfish as a researcher. You read the article thinking, will this help me in my work? And so that's what it is. That's how you are evaluated. Have you written something useful? Have you written something helpful? Is it a new method that helps people do their work easier? Is it a review so people understand better the field because you've helped them synthesize that material? That's what readers do. That's what you do. That's what people will do with your work. And it's interesting to remember that, because your work defines you. That's how it works. You have your set of published papers. That set of published papers really are, that's it. That's you as a scientist, you as a researcher. You might be a great person, a wonderful father. You might have a great Facebook page. But in reality, people look at what you published, on what, in which journal, how many citations, over the years, and they see how you've changed, what you've changed, different topics you've been researching, which universities you changed to and moved to. That publication history defines you. And that's what you do. You look someone up. If someone says, hey, there's a vacancy in this lab, you don't check out the Facebook page. You check out the lab head, you check out all the publications, you check out what research they're doing, and then you read the vacancy. Because if it's not the right person, not the right field, it's not the right fit for you. Because that's what it is. You've got to be comfortable in that research area. You're not going to go just for the job. You're going to go because the job is in what you want it to be in. And so this research passport, in effect, is your publication history. You go on people's websites, they show very proudly where they've published. And other things, where they've been speaking, or if they're on boards, if they help with some funding agency or whatever. That's part of their background. It's also very fragile, because if you damage it by, say, publishing unethically or plagiarizing or whatever, that can damage your publication history, which can damage your job prospects. So it's interesting. It's great. It helps you get places for new institutes and so on. Even it helps you change countries into the US. Why? The number of people scientists who write to us as a publishing house, hey, I've been an author of your journals, please can you fill out this standard form to say that I published with you and it's been well downloaded for my green card application to the immigration authorities in the US. And it's interesting, that's seen, if you're a scientist wanting to reside permanently in the US, Your publication history is essential. Number of downloads, number of citations, if you're in a reviewer, it's all part of your value as a scientist to be allowed to immigrate into the US, interestingly. But anyway, coming back, why are you going to publish? You're going to publish because you have to, for two reasons. Firstly, you're given some sort of money, salary or grant or something, and for that, the authorities feel they want something from you, which is fine, because you do it for free. If they knew, they might stop your money, but you just want to publish. Why? You're a scientist. You've got a sense of curiosity you can't switch off. I'm a scientist, I'm a chemist. Can you switch off that curiosity? You can't. It's a curse. And so what you do with it, you research things. And in the research, you research, you find things out, and you investigate. It excites you, of course, or else you wouldn't do it. And then you share those thoughts with other people. Hey, guys in the lab, look at this. Yeah, great, cool. And everyone's excited. And then you go to another department, different field, they're not quite so excited. You try talking about it at home, around the table, at the meal, not excited. Supermarket, they don't want to know. Perhaps at a conference of like-minded people, some people are interested, giving a talk. But in fact, the way is to publish a peer-reviewed paper, and so the people in your field who are interested in your work can find it and read it. If they're based in New Zealand or Finland or Canada, they can read your work. And that's neat. That's a way for you to share your findings, your excitement with other people, so they also can find it exciting and find it useful to their work. So you have to somehow publish. But you've also got to publish good stuff. Because if you publish, or you try to publish, not good stuff, it won't make it. Because editors are out there, and they are the filter. Their job is to stop the junk getting through. And about 40% of the stuff that comes in gets rejected straight away by the editor, whose job it is to protect the referees from receiving junk. And so it has to be new material, it has to be useful material, it has to be a new method or a new adaptation of a method, something that helps people. People love a new method. It makes their life easier in the lab. If they love a new method, they'll use it and cite you. If you found a new way of doing something, share it with the world. They'll love you. You might want to also not just publish some original material, but something like a synthesis, a review. You read a whole bunch of information on a topic as part of your research, then you rewrite it in a way that helps people to understand it better, clearer. And that review process of creating a review is interesting. It's actually a useful skill to learn, the skill of synthesizing what you've read into a form using your own words so that other people find it useful. And in some countries, for example, in the UK, University of Birmingham, they actually get second-year students to write a review as part of their training to help them to learn to synthesize. And that's actually a benefit for the students too, because they get a publication quite early on. Reviews are often higher cited than regular papers, and so it's a win-win. And they've learned how to synthesize that information they've read, because we're not used to doing that. We're used to reading it, but not used to reading it and rewriting it in a clear way. And it's a practice. You're not used to writing. You became scientists to avoid writing. Well, I'm sorry. You have to write as well. You have to learn how to write in a clear way and enjoy communicating, because that's part of your job. Part of your job is at a lab bench. Part of your job is sharing your exciting findings in paper, electronically now, and also in talks, posters at workshops or short talks at conferences and so on. And that's what your job is as a scientist, researching and communicating it. It's an interesting thing. You would probably, if someone asked you when you started to do your research, what do you think it is, you wouldn't have said communication. You'd have said research. But in fact, the two are so entwined, you can't do one without the other. You try and communicate without any background. In research, it's empty, it's hollow. You've got to have the research and then communicate it. And so that's what you're going to be wanting to do. And therefore it's new, exciting, it's great, it's hot. It's not going to be repeated material. It's not going to be out of date. It's not going to be sort of illogical, inconclusive, the wrong information. It's not going to be almost a Me Too paper. It's going to advance the field a bit. Some papers advance the field amazingly, and some papers advance the field a bit. If it advances the field nothing, you shouldn't publish. You should get more material so you do have enough material to advance the field a bit. That's your job as a researcher, to advance the field a bit. Each paper you publish helps other people understand the field, is the idea. And of course, 3% more people every year. These are your colleagues. They're also your competitors. They're competing to get into the journal. In size a bit, but not much. Journals are increasing in numbers, but not as much. There's more papers being written than used to be, ever. Although there's more journals, it's still more pressure. So that's why I'd say 20 years ago, the rejection rate was 40%, 30%. Now it's 70%. So from that point of view, it's an awful lot of competition for you to beat back, to get your paper in the journal you want to be in. Because obviously there's many journals you can publish in. If you're publishing in say, cell biology, publishing in Cell, amazing. A 98% rejection rate. Publishing in International Journal of Cell Biology, pretty good. Publishing in the Siberian Journal of Cell Biology, not so good, but at least you published. It's still findable just about by Google Scholar, but not in PubMed, because they're not in PubMed. So that's the question. You've got to work out where you're going to be, where you're going to go. How can you get your paper strong enough to outshine other people's papers? Because that's what it is. Because the editor gets papers every day, day in, day out. Some journals, perhaps not. Some journals might be a few per week. But some journals are dozens of papers a day. So why should your paper stand out? That's what you've got to somehow do. You've got to somehow make your paper stand out. And there's a few ways you can do that. I'll get more into that later. The structure, how you write things, how you make sure it's obvious. But it's very important that you really focus on what you and share, because you only got a few minutes of the editor's time to make an impression. So it has to be novel, clear, useful, exciting, but being humble. That's a challenge. You're not going to be selling a used car, or not lying. You're actually going to be telling the truth, but being exciting. And you've also got to say, here's what we found, and in an exciting way, but you mustn't say how wonderful you are. Challenge. You're not used to that. And also, you're not writing a novel. You're actually explaining a story. You're saying to this reader, or these readers, hey, here's what I think was a problem. Here's what I did as a method. Here's what I found. And here's what I think is going on. And you want them to follow that logical story and come to the same conclusions you do. If they come to different conclusions, fair enough. But at least they have followed the story. And if they think, okay, well, actually, that's an interesting process. I think it's something else going on. Fine. They'll take your paper. They will cite it. They'll do some more research around it and publish, saying, in addition to this previous work, here's what I think might be a mechanism here. So that's fine. And that's how science moves on, a bit at a time, each person citing each other. And you've got to make sure that whatever you're saying is great mustn't be hidden like a novel in the final page, no, the conclusion. It actually has to be all the way through. The strength, the significance of what you've done has to be there, up front, bold, in the abstract, in the just certainly in the results, conclusions. Just here's what is happening, so that the editor and the reviewers can see it easily. They're busy people. They're going to miss your wonderful information if it's hidden, tucked away somewhere. So therefore, it has to be there very clear for them to see. Editors and reviewers are busy people, and they do this in their spare time. A reviewer, an experienced reviewer, takes 3 or 4 hours to review your paper. An inexperienced one who's keen, knows the field, might take 6 or 8 hours to review your paper, which is fine, because there's benefits of being a reviewer. I won't go into those too much, because you actually get to see what's happening ahead of time. You also get to see how bad some papers are, and you learn from their mistakes. But it's the important thing with the reviewers, they got to see clearly what's going on. And then the editor also has not much time, because of course editors and reviewers, they're teaching, they're researching, they're writing papers, and they're doing all the various things. They might be running a department, all the things that happen around senior scientists, and at the same time they're doing this. Why? Because they want to. And so these people are busy people, but they are human. So therefore, you've got to make sure that you recognize that. So if you have an easier path for them, make their job easier, they'll make your life easier. So if you actually make your paper easier to review, more likely it will get reviewed. If you make it a difficult paper to review, it probably won't even go out for review, it'll be desk rejected. Recognize peer review is great, but peers are human, and you've actually got to recognize that this happens, and the reality of science publishing. So before you start to get published, you've got to think, okay, what's going on out there? Sometimes scientists are so focused on what they're doing, head down on the bench, doing their thing. Great. Really focused. They don't look at what's happening around them. You need to have some strategy and some strategic intelligence. You need to actually really work out who out there are your competitors, who out there are your potential colleagues, who might you do perhaps some international collaborations with, because that helps you to develop yourself and your research, because the two go hand in hand. And so if you don't regularly check out what's happening in your field, you might get surprised. What happens if you're busy working on a project, you're about to publish, you're so focused on that you don't realize that some group in Melbourne, Australia, published that 2 months ago? You're too late. You didn't know it was coming. And you've got to know these things. It doesn't take much. It takes initially perhaps an afternoon behind your computer, and you're extremely knowledgeable about your field. After that, it takes perhaps an hour every month just to keep up to date. That's not much investment. It's enough for you to be strategically aware of what your field is doing, who is actually publishing, who's about to publish, you can tell, and who perhaps is stopping publishing, who's winding down their career. All these things are useful intelligence for you. You're clever people. As scientists, you've got to use part of that cleverness. You have the tools. The libraries bought the tools for you, and yet so many people just don't use them. You know, they use Google. Google's free. Google's great for finding restaurants. I'm not so sure it's best for finding the best protein folding person in North France. But people use it. Why? Because they always use Google. You should hear librarians talking about Google. They're not happy about it because they are the search experts, and they can see how people, these guys, Haglund and Olsen, that quote in red under the bottom. People don't know what they're looking for, then they're surprised when they don't find it, basically. And that's what happens with Google. There's things you can do. You actually can sign up for alerts as to the top download, the top cited, and these are alerts that are sent to you and tells you, top cited of course in your field or your journal, tells you what people will find interesting to read and use. And the top downloads are much more current, what in the last 3 months was downloaded the most in your field or that journal. And that is also useful information for you to know who is publishing material which other people in the field find of interest. Firstly, you might find it also of interest. That's good educational material for you to help you in your research. And secondly, it shows you just what is a top interesting field. A hot field, a top field, has more researchers, but much more research money allocated to it, and much more opportunities in terms of vacancies. If you're publishing in a field or researching a field that's shrinking, that hasn't quite survived enzyme regulation or something, really it's a dying field. If you're in that area, there's not much competition, everyone's left, but at the same time, there's also not much opportunity or money. It's a trade-off. You need to know these things. And you can do things like, look at the altmetrics process. Altmetrics is, you can actually see what's being used in social media to around that topic, what's being blogged, what's being tweeted on a certain topic. And so it's interesting things. And by looking at who's doing what, you can actually see what's coming. Because if you actually find someone who's a top researcher or top institute, check out the website of their university, check out their lab. They'll tell you, here's what we're researching, which means that's what they're about to publish next. And if it's the same field as you just have a race. You didn't know it, but suddenly you found this group in Toronto doing exactly the same as you. Wow, that's great, perhaps, to have some sort of a collaboration. But perhaps short-term, you want to publish before them. Because like a horse race, first past the post wins. No one knows the other horses. And that's what you've got to do. As a researcher, you've got to be aware what's out there. If you do suddenly find someone has published ahead of you, you've got to cite that work in your work. You can't ignore it. Researchers out there called reviewers will look at that work you send in and say, but there was a work published 2 months ago. Why did the author not mention it? Are they that backward? Are they that not focused on what's out there? And so therefore you really got and sometimes to beat it. And of course you have things to evaluate the journals, the impact factor, which is good things and bad things about the impact factor, more later. The journal analyzer, the SNP, the SJR, H-index of a journal, H-index of a person, all these things are bibliometrics to help you understand what's happening out there. If you are going to insist on using Google or Google Scholar, please use the advanced search option, top right-hand corner box there. It's far better, if you can, to use things like Science Direct, Scopus, Web of Science, Web of Knowledge, much more detailed, much more specific. PubMed also. And use Boolean search logic, the so-called proximity indicators, the WN or pre-N, example on a slide here. That gets you a closer set of words, and therefore, rather than getting, say, 10 million hits in Google, you get perhaps 400 papers in Google Scholar or in PubMed. That's much more manageable for you to look through and see what's of interest to you. And that's the important thing. And you can also sign up using a QR code or something similar. You can sign up to get a regular email every few months as to the top downloaded for a certain field or a certain journal, just to tell you what's coming, what's of interest, what actually do people want to read, what do they find of value. And you'll find that of value too, and also you'll see who's busy and who's doing their thing. Downloads are much quicker to see what's happening in terms of change than citations. Citations are 2 years old, downloads are 6 months old, 3 months old. And so we used download data internally in Elsevier to spot new trends, to see if a certain field perhaps has more and more submissions to it, so we might need to launch a journal in that area. So we used it strategically ourselves in terms of supporting you guys with launching new journals. And so this is a screenshot from Scopus. And what we've done is a way to use Scopus in a different way. You might use Scopus just looking for a paper, but here, using a search word, I use protein folding. Protein folding, 74,000 documents found at the day I did this. And there's 4,500 per year. That means that it's a regular field, quite large, growing, 4,500, strong field, protein folding. You can then sort by citations, see some great, amazing reviews, highly cited, one here, 7,500 citations, So that's, I'd say, is a pretty impressive article on protein folding. Useful to you, helps your research to find highly cited papers, read them, they help you. Filter on that to, say, France, the other screen, suddenly it drops to 1/10. That does mean that France produces 10% of the world's papers in protein folding. So if, for example, you were thinking of moving to, and you're a protein folding person, moving to France or Belgium or the UK, France has more papers in protein folding than the UK. So there's more opportunities there. So it's a useful way for you to also analyze what's going on. You can also see who is doing it, who are active people, who are top institutes. All this information you can do easily in an hour or two, screen, looking at the tools it has them. And you can find out about people too. This screenshot is someone, Cancer Cell. It's a pretty high-profile journal, that's true. One guy, David Sabatini. Just random, basically. Review article. When I took the screenshot, 625 citations, this article. Pretty impressive, huh? Okay, so that's interesting. So obviously, if you're working in this field, you need to know about this guy and what he's written about. So what do you know about him? You check him out. You say, okay, who is he? Well, he's published 5 papers, 13, 10. Okay, so he's actually active. He's increasing his number of publications per year. So he's not on a decline, not end of his career, or not becoming an administrator or something. He actually is very, very active. Okay, so highly cited and active. Wow. And he's still very active when he's doing what he's doing. You will find out also, what is he doing? What's his H-index? H-index is the Hirsch index. It's like the personal impact factor. It's the number of papers you published versus the number of citations, and whether the two crosses a line intersection is the H-index. A typical H-index for a pretty good researcher is 30 to 40. For a junior, it can be 5, 6, 7. This guy, what is he? 57. Okay, so that's a pretty good guy. So he's very active. And so you can actually then follow him, see what he's doing in his lab, and you'll know what he's going to publish next. And so if that's your field, do some research. Find out who is top people and what they're doing. You can do this, behind your screen very easily. When you go to a conference, see who the speakers are. If you go to a conference room, which rooms are bulging, which are empty? A room that's bulging means it's sort of intelligence you've got to have. And just see who has the buzz, who are various plenary lecturers. See which posters people are clustering around and talking about. This is all just the background knowledge you need to have, as well as being an amazing scientist. I'm assuming you're amazing scientists. If you aren't amazing scientists and you're not going to be writing very good science, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. That's between you and your professor. But as far as I'm concerned, you've got good science, I can help you get there. But it's important for you to recognize you've got to use part of your intelligence to be strategic in understanding what's happening out there. Just as deans and heads of department have to be strategic in understanding budgeting and government policy, you've got to be responsible for understanding who's out there, who's active, who's not active, who's a rising star, who's perhaps stopping because they're about to retire, and so on. It's interesting. Anyway, coming back to your research now. Before you're about to write your paper, you've got to say, well, is what I'm about to write useful? Is it useful enough? Does it advance the field enough? Is it a hot topic? Is it exciting? Are there problems in my field that this particular paper will help understand something, help a new method or something? Great. If you've got answers to all those, it's time to think about writing a paper. If not, you're too early. You've actually got to have more material there. Then you've got to say, well, what sort of paper do I write? Do I actually write a paper, the normal paper? A normal paper is called a full-length paper, original research article, or something similar like that. And that is a typical 8, 10-page article. You also can have short articles, short different journals. Now, a rapid communication actually is not correct. Everything is rapid now, but it used to be faster. That's why it tends to be now called short communications. Now, some journals only have short communications. So in biochemistry, You have Feb's letters or BBRC. Those just have short papers, nothing else. And some journals have a mixture of short and long, and some don't want to have short papers, only long ones. So that helps you to decide where you're going to go. If you have a long paper, you can't submit it to Feb's letters, for example. Now, why would it be a short paper? Perhaps you've got not enough material. Perhaps it's just a slight tweak on a method, but you want to publish it to share it with the world, which is great. You're helping other people. Or perhaps it's so amazing that you want to publish quickly to claim it so your name is linked to it. And then later on, you do some more research, and then you write a longer paper citing the first paper. And that is a mechanism often for really seminal work. You get it out quickly, because often it is quicker that way, and then you do the full paper afterwards. So it's two schools of thought. One is there's not much material, and one is I need to be quick. And sometimes an editor will actually suggest you change. You send in a full paper, and they'll say, this is nothing new here. It's all a bit sort of too much fluff. Shrink it right down and make it a short game. Be involved with drafting the article, revising it, and agree that the final version's okay. So that's pretty good. But what happens if it's a lab tech? The lab technician is involved doing the acquisition of data, but not involved in the analysis and interpretation. They can't be an author. If you involve them with the analysis and interpretation as well, they can be an author. That's the difference. If they're not involved in the discussion and the interpretation, just data collection, they're what's called acknowledged individual. So you put it in the last final paragraph before the references. You acknowledge where the funding came from, you acknowledge who helped you with materials, with kit, cell lines, you acknowledge who helped you perhaps with, as a technical person, and that's where they go. They do not go in the list of authors. That's an important point to have. And also you've got to say, well, if you are an author, where do you fit? Who's first author? First author is the person who does most of the work, which is fair enough. And the first author is someone who really pulled together the experiment, pulled together the paper, the whole works. And there's also something called the corresponding author. The corresponding author is normally the last author, the senior author. Why is it called corresponding author? Because in the old days, the postdoc did the paper, moved to another lab somewhere in the country, the world. And then when someone came to read that paper months later, and they wanted to have some discussion on it, they couldn't find that first author, of course, they'd gone. Eventually they'll turn up somewhere else with a new paper. But they wanted to have communication, so they wanted to correspond with someone, and that person left behind, the senior author in the lab, is the person they would write to. That's what they call corresponding author. Often nowadays they're also called senior author. You can be first author, you can be second author, third author, a whole range. In most countries it doesn't matter where you are in the middle. In Germany it does. In Germany, last author means something, and second to last means something, and so on. You can be also co-first author. Co-first author means a little asterisk next to the first and second, the footnote on the first page. It says, please note the first and second author contributed equally to this. Okay. If that happens with you, try to be the first author. Because they don't say Smith, Jones, et al., they say Smith, et al. As you're Smith, you want to be Smith. You don't want to be et al. So please try to be the first. All right, no fights, but just try to make the point that you actually contributed a bit more than the other person equally, so you want to be there. First author. And how about other sorts of authors? How about ghost authors? What's a ghost author? It's not the paranormal, honestly. A ghost author is someone you've forgotten. We as a publisher get these letters. I've just seen this paper published. I was involved initially in setting up this experiment. I moved to another lab. They forgot me. I should be there as a co-author. That's sort of things we get as publisher. And so we then go to that author of the paper and say, hi, this person says they should be in there. Oh, well, yeah, forgot, yes. because they moved on. What happens is you look at the lab, these are the people who are involved, you forgot the person who left a year ago. And so when you are writing the paper, think, who possibly could be involved? Reach out to them by email, say, hey, I know you are now somewhere else, but you set up this thing. Let's have you as a co-author, you'll be in the middle, you'll be author number 3. And so you involve them in a discussion, you involve them in the draft, you involve them in the final, and that's fine, everyone's happy. And otherwise you've got to do a co-agenda and so on in the journal, and it's a hassle. So it's far better. Try not to have ghost authors. It also saves me work. Now, gift authors is something different. There's 2 sorts of gift authors, both bad. One is a gift author, happens a lot in Asia, where the head of the department decides they're going to go on every single paper published in that particular department, even if they don't know what it is, their name's on it. Now, how could that person somehow be involved in 90 papers? But they are, magically. And that's wrong, because they're not involved, they're an acknowledged individual, but somehow that's their status, they can claim that. We make the point again and again and again, it's wrong. We travel the world saying it's wrong. Eventually those people will retire and we'll get there. In the meantime, that's the sort of gift author we don't like. There's an even worse sort of gift author when the people writing the paper think, well, let's just add this extra famous person in here as an extra co-author, because it'll slide through the peer review. It does. It helps. Oh, wow, that guy's involved. Yeah, okay, must be good work. Gets published. This, of course, this famous person who has an alert on their name, like most people, suddenly they see they're linked to this paper. What's this? I know nothing about this. They then contact us. They tend not to use email, they tend to use telephone. Hi, what's this? I know nothing about this work. They use my name without permission. This is a fraudulent paper, it has to go. It does. So it might have gone very quickly through the peer review. It does not stay up very long afterwards. So it's not good. So please avoid ghosts and gifts. All right? Everyone else, acknowledged individuals. People who got the funding, people who helped you, people with kit. That's great. And how about as an author? If you've got an interesting name, say you have a German name with an umlaut. If you're a co-author, what happens is you're then moving around and you're perhaps doing some interesting co-work with people. You're doing some collaboration, and the person writing the paper spelled your name wrong because they used the email, because you can't have an umlaut in an email. What then? You've just lost a citation. And it happens with all the strange characters that can't be reproduced by email, but can be reproduced by typesetters. How about if you're Asian and you've got to decide your family name's at the front, do you actually switch it around to make it match Western standards because you're now living in Europe? What do you do? Keep consistent, be always consistent. How about you have 2 family names, Spanish? Do you keep both of them, report both of them? Yeah. What happens if you're in France? You can't, you're not allowed to. The French system says 1 surname. If you want to have both, put the hyphen between. That gets around the Spanish rule, the Spanish names in the French rules. But again, be aware of what's out there. You've got to be consistent. Always use your same name. If you've got multiple names, always use the same one, always. Be consistent. What happens if you're a young, female, clever researcher? You're doing wonderful things. You're researching all these things. You're publishing, you're getting citations. Great. And then you get progress, promotion, marriage, good for you. More publications, more citations, assistant professor, associate professor, professor, hooray. Divorce. Okay, never mind. Bury yourself in your work, keep on going. Then you get this decision. Do you now publish your next paper with the name of the person you now hate? Or do you go back to your maiden name and pick up those citations you lost earlier? It's a tough call. You can consolidate with things like ORCID or with the Scopus author ID, but perhaps you should consider, as female scientists, to always Be like actresses. Always use your maiden name through all of your professional life. It's good. It also gives you flexibility. You can get married and divorced often. But the important thing is, be consistent. Always, every time you've been cited, you deserve that citation. Make sure you keep it. You know? This is an example in Scopus of an author profile. This is an unusual named person. Well, it's not that unusual, but Dutch have weird names. Laura J. Van Veer, which means Laura J. of the Feather. Okay. She has found all these various names here, which she has been co-authored with the different spellings. And so she's claimed them all. And she's 200 documents, 18,000 citations, so she's pretty high profile. 54 H index. This is her maiden name. She wants to make sure every single citation she's due, she gets. And good for her, as I say. So again, be as consistent as you can be. So there are things like this Scopus where you can consolidate them. There's something called ORCID as well. If you've got a name that's similar to someone else, you can actually, ahead of time, before it's compulsory, you can ask for your own ORCID ID. You go to orchid.org, and there it is. A 14-digit number. Your unique number. Just as a book has a special unique number, the ISBN, each researcher in the world can have a 14-digit unique number. Now, it already happens in some countries. For example, in the Netherlands, every researcher has a unique number. And it's optional now, but I'm sure in a decade or so, everyone in the world who's a researcher will have a unique number called the ORCID number. It was only launched a year ago. And you can do this. That's the website, orchid.org. And you don't have to, it's an option. But it's a way that in the future, it's hoped, when you go to submit a paper, it'll just say, do you have an ORCID number? You type the ORCID number, and it fills in all your details for you. That's the idea, autofill. And we're working on that with the ORCID organization. So all publishing houses with good submission systems will actually help you to submit. Okay, here's the point I want to stop for a while, for two reasons. First, I'm getting a bit, and secondly, a bathroom break. And so I want to just stop at this point and say, if there's any questions, I'll deal with them during the 10 minutes of break. We'll have 10 minutes of break, and then we'll come back, and then we'll talk about how you structure the article, how you write the article, how the various components are made up, how you deal with referees, and all the various things that you shouldn't do later in terms of ethics. So at that point, I'll just stop for a few minutes, and then we'll come back in 10 minutes. It's now 25 past 11, so let's say 25 to 12, 10 minutes. Thank you. Oh. Good? Okay, thank you. Oh yes, I have a microphone. Okay, thank you for coming back. I now recognise that it's a long spot of time you've got to allocate from other things you've got to do, research and so on. So just going on to the general structure of the research paper. Now, I've got more material here than you can possibly hear in the time you've allocated. Now, I apologise for that, but at least you're going to have the PDF afterwards so you can go through in some details. Because that's the important thing, is to get all the various bits and pieces, because most of these tips are just sensible things. So why do we have a fish here? Why not? It's a picture. We think in pictures as humans, so you should use figures as much as you can do in your papers. Now, but it makes sense, because the fish has a head, a body, and a tail, and your article has a head, a body, and a tail. And the head, body, tail, the structure, title, abstracts, keywords, main text, and conclusion. Head, body, tail. So it actually is a link. The figure makes sense in this. I would not suggest you put a fish in your research article, but a figure that has value to what you're doing. Unless, of course, you're doing aquatics. So the title, abstract, keywords can be found everywhere in the world. You don't have to be within the library IP address. So that you can go be in Starbucks and you can find the title and abstract of everything in the world. So that's how you've got to have your title findable, keywords findable, and the abstract making sense. The main text, your text, layout is the structure you typically would read an article. It's not how you write it, it's how you read it. Introduction, methods, results, discussions, and then the conclusion. This is how you write the article. This is how you read it. You read it from the head to the tail. You write it like building a wall. So that's the timeline. You start with your figures and tables. As you're researching all your data, please try and record it in English, not Spanish. And then it makes it easier for you to write your article later. Then you have your figures with nice little figure captions, your tables, legends, and that is a self-contained bit of information, easier to write because it's your research results. Then, for that, it saves you having to write text around that. Then you do your method, you describe the method. If it's a simple method like Lowry protein purification, you just we use the Lowry protein method citation. If it's complicated, you go through the whole method. Results come next. Again, that's easy to write. Discussion around the results, reasonably easy, but not quite so easy. It's a sequence. Then a conclusion should flow on from the discussion. Then after the conclusion, then you write the introduction, where your work fits into the field, and then the title and the abstract and keywords. Now, if you try that, it's easier to do. Because if you try doing it that way, starting with a blank piece of paper, the title and down, it's hard work. That way is easier, and if you're not sure, try it. If it doesn't work, do what you're using now. But I think that's a good thing to have. I wish I had had that. The title, I'm going to go through the bits of the article typically, and it has to be short, snappy, but complete. It's a challenge. And you've got to have as few words as possible, and the main subject should be in the first few words. It shouldn't be at the end. It has to catch attention of people. Its job is to explain what you've done and explain in such a way that when someone scans through a list of titles, your one jumps out. That's the idea. The keywords, of course, are the words that are used to find your paper online using PubMed or something similar. And if you're invisible, you will not be found, you'll not be read, appreciated, downloaded, cited. So therefore, try with the keywords to see what you get. Check keywords, see what you can find in PubMed or find it in Scopus. And then if you've got too many, your too broad keywords, narrow it down. If it's too narrow, so you get 3 hits, it's far too narrow. So you get that middle ground. And also gives you a way to find recent papers you might not know about, which you can then appreciate, use in your research, and also cite, because the referees will find them too. The abstract, you tell people what you've done and what you found. And it has to be very, very short. It's one paragraph, typically 250 words, 200 words, with bullet points. And it has to be an honest description of what you've done. Exciting, enthusiastic, but humble. Interesting challenge. And a clear abstract is what's necessary because the referee is given the title and the abstract and can say, yes, I want to see this paper or not. That's all they're given. So therefore it has to be very clear. And a typical abstract is, here's what we did, here's what we found. And that's it. The introduction is to describe where your work fits into the field, what problems there are in the field, perhaps things that work well, a method should be better, some mechanism is not understood, or something. You're describing what the problem is, and you've written this after the rest, so it should match. Here's the problem I'm going to try and fix. It's not a history lesson. A few references, say a seminal paper, a recent review. That's enough to explain where your work fits and where you're coming from. It should be. You only use relevant references. What your reference's job is twofold. Firstly, a reference's job is to tell a reader where you are coming from. And also, if they don't know, they can click and go through and read that article and then come back again. Click, click, electronic, remember? And then, also, it validates your work. With references, you're saying to the reader, I've based my work on these people's work. Therefore, that's my validation. And you don't need to go prove why you've done this. That's enough. So it's very, very useful to pick your references with care. And the referees will look at these very carefully as well. With the methods, you've got to be as clear as you can be. Can someone take the method you've described, repeat the experiment, get the same result? If they can't, you're not clear enough. If they can, and firstly, they'll repeat the experiment, get the same result, then use that method in their other work. And if they don't reproduce your work, they're not going to cite you. If you've forgotten to use one line in a method, if you've forgotten to say it has to be ultra pure chemical, 99.9%, not 98%, or else it doesn't work, that doesn't help. Think of that reader as the colleague around the corner who you want to reproduce the experiment, and be as clear as you can be. If you need to have a whole protocol in the supplementary files, that's okay. You just do that, you just say that. Of course, you have control experiments. Of course, you have the description is in the past tense. You describe the methods and results in the past tense. You describe your thought process that's happening around it, your conclusion, in the present tense. That's the difference. You're standing in a moment in time. Here's what we did. Here's what we think it means. Past, present. Referees will look very carefully at your method. If your method is flawed, what you measure is flawed, therefore what you conclude is flawed, an error. If your method is sound, probably what you've measured is sound, therefore what you're going to discuss and think about is also probably sound. So therefore be as clear as you can, because referees look at that to see if it's a sensible, sound basis for a research result. And young investigators tend to share too much material. This picture is an iceberg. Most is below water. You think of the results you've got. Which bit are you going to share with the reader? Which bit above water are you going to share? Which bit below water are you not going to share? You share only the information that's of value, relevant, the main results, the things that help you, the reader, to you, the author, tell a story to the reader. So you pick the findings. Anything that's a bit strange, not expected, check, double check, triple check, great. If it's wrong, don't toss it out, hang on to it, report it, because that's what moves science forward. Of course, you've got to have your stats in place to make sure that your results are accurate, appropriate. If you can, use as many figures and tables as possible, because we think and see and remember figures and, to a degree, tables. But certainly graphs, images, we actually use those all the time. If you look at someone looking at a paper, they'll look at the title, they'll skim through, look at the figures, They'll look at the conclusion, the abstract, and they might read the rest. So the figures are essential to, is the core of your paper. And the good thing about it is you don't need to have to write in the text. If you've got a good figure and a figure legend, you don't need to write all the text about that because the figure has done its job for you. Less writing, less description. And with the figures, the plots, have a simple 3D, 2D plot, just as clear as you can, good data sets, good scales. Make sure the scale legend is in English, not Spanish. You'll be surprised how many people forget to do that. They send it in because they've used that figure on a local poster or a talk. Make sure it's in English. Same thing with photos. Make sure that the caption is in English. Make sure all the bits are there. Use colour only if you have to. Colour's free, of course, on print, in print and in line. But if you are going to use colour, make sure you use squares and diamonds or squares and triangles or something, just to make it easier so that someone can print out in black and white. Think of the reader's needs. It could be that someone, say, in Pakistan doesn't have access to a colour printer at that moment in time, so why force them to go find one? So again, just be mindful of the reader's needs. And if you need to say, take a photograph or something and add a caption to it, here you've got a caption that says drug crystals. Why? To help the reader. You would know this in your field. You can be woken up at 3 in the morning and understand this actually is drug crystals. Of course it's drug crystals. But for the reader, help them. You're telling a story. The photograph tells a story, or the photomicrograph tells a story. It helps you, and so therefore, if you need be, put little lines there. There are certain things you can do to change around images and certain things you can't do. You can change around the color density and so on, but you can't change around, you can't remove things and add things. The discussion is what we discuss the results you've had. You've actually chance to explain what you think is going on. And it's actually a skill which you might have to develop. You might not have it yet. You're used to measuring, but not necessarily used to discussing this. Make sure you discuss the things you have in the results. The number of people who say, here are the results, here's the discussion, and they actually don't match is too many. So reject. Make sure all the things you have mentioned in the results are explained. Don't say, here's the results, I'll talk about those, ignore those. You mustn't do that either. Here's the results I'm going to share, here's what's going on. That's how it works. And also, it's not that either. It's literally just the ones you're reporting, you talk about. And that should lead on to a conclusion. And the conclusion should be pretty simple. Here's where we are, here's what we think is going on, here's the uses, and here's where we need more research. You tell people where it should happen, and then you claim one of them. And say, here's more research needed, I'm doing this already. Because that often is the case anyway. You have a whole series of experiments, and by claiming one, firstly, you're picket fencing it so someone doesn't have that instead. They think, oh, I won't do that, it's already been claimed. And secondly, people will come to you and say, oh, I want to be involved with this too. Can we have some sort of international collaboration? Because they know you're working on it, because you've told them, and at the same time, they want to join in. That's a good way to firstly claim the area and also get some international collaboration or national collaboration. You don't summarize the paper, of course, that's the abstract's job. And you don't say how wonderful it is. You're humble, remember? Other people can say how wonderful your work is, but you can't. That's why you shouldn't judge the impact, how it's not your Nobel Prize paper. It might be, but you mustn't say that. The references, some publishing houses have automatic reference correction, some don't, many don't. So make sure you're as accurate as you can be with references. If you don't have the reference right, you've just stolen a citation from that author. That's not fair. Treat them as you'd like to be treated. And as far as possible, be using the guide to authors and do it exactly properly. Supplementary material is the material you have that is extra, that huge table that 8 people in the world love to see and the rest don't care about, you can put in there. It has to always link, of course, be linking to the the article. It mustn't just be totally abstract, so you can say you've published it. It has to relate to the article. Some referees check all the supplementary files, and some don't. We don't know who. Assume they will look. Then you've got your article. The co-authors think it's okay. Then it's the covering letter. That is not the abstract. The number of people who just paste the abstract in as a covering letter is ridiculous. That's the way to annoy and waste a chance to influence an editor. It comes through the manuscript. It goes to the editor only. It doesn't go to referees. Doesn't get published. Doesn't be seen by the publisher. It's almost, why should your paper appear in that journal? Why is your paper so special for this journal? It's like you're trying to have a job interview, why you should have this job. And that's what you're doing, in a few lines only, why your work should be published there. And of course, suggest referees, if you're not already asked, and also who you don't want to review your paper. 1 page maximum. All authors approve. Here's why it's important. Here's some suggested referees. Very simple. That is your extra shot at convincing an editor your paper's great. Reviewers, if you're not sure who to suggest, I suggest you pick people who you've cited in the introductory paragraph. They're people who are active in the field. 3 to 6 people, it varies from the guide to authors will sometimes say 3, sometimes say 8. Why? You've got to ask 6 people to get 2 to say yes. They should be people who will help your article get stronger. They should not be your friends down the corridor or your uncle in Toronto. They should actually be people who will help. Because although it's not very nice going through a peer review, your paper is stronger afterwards because of it. So you've really got to think of who will help me best. And then you get to the stage, everyone's happy. You've shared it with your supervisors. You've made a few changes here and there. That's the point. You say, okay, time to do it. Push the button. And then what happens is the editor says, is it all there? Yes, okay. Is it bad English? No, reject. Is it out of scope? Reject. And then if the editor says, okay, it's okay, let's go to the reviewers. They pick the best 2 reviewers in the world, they think. It goes out to those people if they agree. And then those people have 2 weeks or so to decide, to come back with comments and a recommendation. They do not decide, they make a recommendation. Then the editor then looks at the recommendations and says, okay, here's my options. It's reject, accept as is, a minor revision or major revision. That's the various options. And that's the basic process. Some journals have a very polite name for it. They call it the initial editorial review. Some call it a desk reject. 40% of submissions get rejected before going out for peer review because they're not good enough, out of scope, bad English, really in need of some desperate work that should never have been sent in. And that's the job of the editors, is to get rid of those. If you get accepted as is, good for you, wonderful. 1 in 200 papers are accepted as is. If you've had a paper accepted literally as is with no revisions, and you've published less than 200 papers, great, you're ahead of the curve. Rejected, it can happen. Everyone gets rejected, even Nobel laureates, everyone. Why? Did you send it to the wrong journal, maybe? Out of scope? Was it a flawed logic? Can you fix it? Look at what the referees have said. Get cross, angry, for a few minutes, then move on. And then make the changes they suggest and move on to the second journal. Let's face it, you've got this cascade number, these 5 journals. You go to the next one, but always make the changes first, because the chance of one of those 2 referees seeing your paper next time around from the next journal is very high. Because the second journal will think, who are the best 2 people in the world to evaluate this paper? These people, and one is the same. And if that person spent 4 hours on a Sunday afternoon revising your paper, suggesting all the things you should do, and you ignore it, what are they going to think when they see that paper unchanged 3 weeks later from the next journal? They will mention it to the editor-in-chief, and so your paper will be rejected straight away. So, How about revision? If it's a revision, a minor revision goes back to the editor. It says, okay, here's the minor revision. Have they made the changes? Yes. Accept? Yes or no? Minor revision, 95% chance of yes. A major revision goes back out to the referees, the same two referees, who then see if all the changes have been made, and if they're happy with those, and if so, back it comes to the editor. Sometimes a journal will insist on a major revision followed by a minor revision. Major might just make it, it's not always the case. Minor probably make it. When you are responding to the referees, you've got to do a point by point. Every point of the referee, you've got to explain, here's the point, here's what I've done. Here's the point, here's what I've done. You